Are you ready? Let's go. Ready?
Ready.
Yeah, ready when you are.
Okay, you ready?
Yep.
Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
Holden Shepherd, Heidi Anderson, Jan Latter, Alison Patterson, welcome to my little show.
Why do you call it a little chat show?
Jan Nichols, Sam Eichen, Annabelle Smith, Donna Mazza, Rebecca Watson, Jonelle Fraser, Tracy Jacobson, Adam Wallace, Monique Mulligan, Matt Glover, Karen Young. I don't even know where I'm going with this. Welcome to my show. Now, before we meet our guest, Inspiring Kids Home Edition is now available. Now, this is the Inspiring Kids course that I've designed specifically for kids with autism, with ADHD, dyslexia, learning difficulties, anxiety, disability. It's designed for these kids to feel okay about who they are. This is that big self-acceptance thing that is so important, because there's nothing out there that kids can watch, like a program or anything like that, that says directly, hey, you are amazing just the way you are. You are fantastic and you are an amazing human being. That's what this program does. Plus, that's module 1, module 2, 3, and 4 goes through emotional regulation, so to manage those big emotions like anxiety or anger, and talk about encouraging empathy, resilience, and obviously creativity. So, Inspiring Kids Home Edition is now available, and I'm realizing even in homeschooling communities, there's a big gap, because you can call it the social and emotional learning for homeschooling communities. It is now available. So just go to my website down here and take a look around, and this will be, I think, play a big role and make a big difference to the lives of many, many, many kids. I have just had the most amazing conversation with Jessica Walton, and she's the author of Stars in Their Eyes, brand new book out through Fremantle Press and illustrated by the amazing Aśka. Now, fantastic conversation. I have learnt so much from chatting to Jessica about disability, about queerness, about relationships, about love. Now, let me give you a short bio about Jessica. Now, Jessica is a queer disabled writer and teacher. She's the author of picture book Introducing Teddy. Great little story that involves Neil Gaiman. You're going to love that. As well as a range of short stories published in anthologies for kids and teens. She co-wrote an episode of Get Crackin', focusing on disability, which aired on the ABC and is featured in the anthology Meet Me at the Intersection, Fremantle Press, and Growing Up Disabled in Australia, Black Ink books. So please, pour a wine, coffee, tea, whatever, take the dog for a walk, I don't know, whatever you want to do. But let's get to know Jessica Walton. Jessica Walton, thank you so much for joining me on my show. How are you going?
I'm doing well, thank you. We've got some pretty dreary weather outside, so I'm just looking out at the grey skies and drizzly rain and trying to write through that.
Well, you are in Melbourne, so, you know, it's to be expected.
True, I'm on Bunurong land.
Ah, well, you know what? Your book, Stars in Their Eyes, I'm not normally a fan of graphic novels, but this one I absolutely love. And obviously illustrated by the amazing Aśka, who lives in WA where I am.
Yes.
There was so much goodness in here. There's disability, there's queerness, there's anxiety, there's a great relationship between mother and daughter, which I absolutely love. And you've got, you know, young romance in there as well. You've got Comic Cons, all that sort of stuff. Firstly, how has it been received? What sort of feedback are you getting?
I'm loving hearing back from particularly queer and disabled people who are enjoying the representation side of things. So I know how powerful that is for me as a reader. And unlike you, I read a lot of graphic novels. I think that's my favorite kind of book to read, maybe because I'm a parent of young children and graphic novels are often easy to kind of get through in a quick reading session. I like short stories and poems for the same reason, because I can kind of dip into them and then get back to the kids. So in graphic novels, you know, I guess there hasn't been a huge amount of Australian YA graphic novels and within those, you know, not a huge amount of queer and disability representation. So it's just nice to be kind of filling in a little gap, which is, I think, what a lot of writers from underrepresented communities are doing bit by bit. So, you know, we take the gap that we found as kids and we fill it. So I particularly like hearing from queer and disabled readers who are kind of experiencing the filling in of that gap. And that's not to say that my experience that I'm writing about with Maisie is everybody's experience of queerness and disability, but the more stories we have out there that represent those communities, the more likely it is that a young person will see themselves or a part of themselves represented in one of the books they read.
Yeah, because what you're doing is creating that safe space where they can either A, connect with what you've written, or feel safe to write or talk about their own story or their own journey. So tell us a little bit about Stars in Their Eyes. What actually happens? What's the story about?
So I originally wrote a short story for an anthology, which, you know, I was like, well, this is my first short story. It's my first YA story. I'm just going to cram as much of me into this story as I can, so that if I never get another YA thing published, then I've got me represented on the page somewhere. And so I really wanted to write a day in the life of a queer disabled teenager, or, you know, a couple of days of kind of just following someone who's kind of doing something that they enjoy, but it's not like a really dramatic plot line. It's not a really tragic or inspiring plot line. And that's because a lot of disability representation, particularly when written by non-disabled people, kind of follows this narrative of the tragic disabled person or the inspiring disabled person. And it can be quite frustrating as a disabled reader to come up against those stereotypes over and over again. So yeah, this just follows Maisie as she goes to a fan con with her mum. So I'm a big geek, so I really wanted to kind of reflect my love of
I kind of guessed.
all things and so and I've just been watching Gilmore Girls, which, you know, I have a lot of problems with that show, but I do really love the fact that it depicts a close relationship between a mother and daughter, because I think that we don't always see parents in YA, and when we do, they're not always great relationships. And that's not to say that you know, that needs to be represented too, difficult relationships with parents, but I really also think we need to see the hopeful, joyful kind of stories about full acceptance of queerness and of disability, parents who totally get it, who are, you know, who have their kids' backs, who have done the learning, and, you know, they might not be perfect at parenting a queer disabled child, but they are doing their best, and they have their kids' best interest at heart, and they love them and want to be close to them and to understand them. And so that I really wanted to show that with Maisie and her mum. So they're road tripping together to a fan con, and they're there to meet Maisie's superhero, who is a superhero in a TV show. And that's kind of what it is about to start with. But when Maisie gets to the fan con, there are some challenges around anxiety and panic, which is something I've experienced myself. And also some challenges physically in terms of pain and pain levels and mobility, and being in a space that's really crowded when you have mobility and anxiety issues. So so that becomes a part of the story. And also she's experiencing inaccessibility and ableism, both along the way when interacting with strangers and also at FanCon. And then finally, it's also a bit of a rom-com, so a bit of a, you know, a chance to explore a queer disabled young person being the main character and being at the center of a romance, which is definitely not something that I think queer and disabled people are used to seeing a lot of. It's definitely getting a lot better in YA in terms of queer representation, and it is getting better with disability representation, but yeah, I don't think there's enough, and I really wanted something that was light and fluffy and romantic. So I've put that in there as well. So basically me trying to cram everything I wanted in a story into this.
Well, it works. And I was going to ask you how vulnerable you felt putting everything in there, because it's a lot of it's you, but that's what you wanted to do. What you didn't want, there was not. Did you feel vulnerable at all, or you just wanted to put it out there?
I did feel vulnerable, and particularly when it was a short story. So when I was writing for the anthology, I was approached by Fremantle to write this story, and I thought, this is exciting, but I've got to get it right because, as I said, it might be my one chance. So I felt a lot of pressure to kind of get the representation right, to make it a good story as well. I was like, am I even good at writing YA? Am I good at writing a short story? Because I was a picture book writer and was sort of dabbling in poetry at that point, but hadn't branched into YA. So I did feel quite vulnerable, just even as a debut writer, that feels vulnerable. But then to also be writing about your community through a character, you want to get it right for your community. You want them to like it. And then also, I think I had that when I was writing. I don't know if other people from underrepresented communities get this, but when I'm writing my characters, it's almost like I'm worried they're not believable because I'm not used to seeing characters like that. So it's hard to actually imagine. It's hard to imagine a disabled person in a romance. And I think that's partly internalized ableism. And it's partly just that there isn't enough of our stories out there. So it was like, well, how would this work? Is it believable that someone would fall in love with someone like me at a fan con? So, I mean, that is internalized ableism, and maybe also a bit of internalized anti-fatness and internalized biphobia, maybe. I don't know. There's all sorts of things going on there. But I think that is something that we work through as writers when we're writing ourselves in, is going, is this story actually good enough? Is this believable? Could someone like me actually be a main character? Could we actually be in a romance? I grew up on stories like Me Before You, where, the disabled person dies in the end, so to have a really happy story, it just sometimes feels a bit hard to write. But Fremantle Press were incredibly supportive, and I had Amberlynn Quay-Mulliner was working with me on this short story, and I kept saying, it's not good enough, I need to pull it. And Amber would keep contacting me and saying, no, don't pull it, we like this story, we really do. No, really, we like this story.
Was it in first person? Did you write it in first person?
No. Oh, did I write the short story in first person? Do you know, I can't even. No, I didn't.
Okay, so it was a little bit distant. So it wasn't you speaking from yours. It was actually just a short story, but it involved all aspects of yourself. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So Maisie isn't 100% me. It's also me trying to remember what it's like to be a teenager. So I'm sure that there's also, I wrote the mum character, and there's a lot of the mum in me too, because I have my own kids now, and I'm no spring chicken. So I was exploring parts of myself through both of those characters, and I think that's something that all writers do. We put parts of ourselves into every character. But obviously Maisie is very much me, and I'll be honest about that. That character is really could be named Jess.
But that's
because Amberlynn. Because Amberlynn kept encouraging me to keep it in, I did, and she helped me make it a better story. And that's something that a great editor can do, is really help the writer to work through the problems they're having with their story, and help you to make it as good as it can be. And now I'm so proud of that little story, and I had no idea it would turn into something like a beautiful graphic novel. So I think for a lot of writers who haven't had a go at writing before, haven't written themselves in, maybe haven't been given a shot by publishing, just what my advice would be, just write the first thing and get it in somewhere, because then you never know where it will lead. So try and have that self-belief, find a good editor who believes in you, and get that first thing published.
Yeah, I mean, having that first thing published is so important and so boosting for your own confidence and your own ability to go, oh, okay, I can do this. And someone does believe in me that they actually want to publish it. And then the whole world can open up. And I think it's because the energy in you changes and you feel better about yourself and better about your story. I mean, because that's what I love about this book. Everything's just so normal, if you know what I mean. That's what you were trying to say. You're just normalizing it. It's no... Like Maisie doesn't die at the end. Sorry, spoiler everyone, she doesn't die. And it's that's what I love about it. But the thing is that someone like myself, who's able-bodied, can read that and walk away and have, oh, so now I know what it's like. Now I know a bit of an insight into what other people go through, just the minutiae of just when Maisie's getting out of the car and all, and just those sort of little things. It's just, the normal everyday things that you would have to deal with. And I've got no idea. I'll learn something. And therefore, okay, that's cool. I've got that.
Yeah.
And then you throw the queerness in on top of that. I think you must be one of the very few to have disability and queerness together in one graphic novel. Would I be right there?
Probably. I mean, I'm sure there are, I'm trying to think, I'm sure there are more of them out there, but I think, publishing has this thing sometimes where they're like, okay, we've published our disabled book for the year, we've published our queer book for the year. The mainstream publishers have they're ticking boxes, I guess. And sometimes I think they can worry that it's too much to have, a character that's from multiple underrepresented communities. But I think there is a real hunger actually out there for people, from readers, to understand outside of their own experience. That's certainly true for me, as well as wanting to see myself represented. I want to understand more about other people and what their lives are like. And I wrote this graphic novel really for other disabled and queer people, but there was one review where someone said, I felt like I was cringing with Maisie through some of these experiences. And afterwards, I reflected on how I would do things differently. And that really blew my mind. I hadn't really thought about how, I spend a lot of time on social media talking to people about disability, about ableism, about inspiration porn, about toxic positivity, about inaccessibility.
I love that inspiration porn. I love that.
Yeah, so that's a term coined by Melbourne activist Stella Young. And I'm hoping that people will learn more about Stella from the scene where I mentioned her at the swimming pool, because I think
I was going to talk about that bit there, that part, because that really struck me. If I can badly recite that bit where Maisie's just swimming, just going to the pool, swimming, and some woman comes up and goes, "Oh, you're such an inspiration. I don't know how you do it." And Maisie's just going, "I'm just here to swim. Hello." Hello.
Just leave me alone.
Leave me alone.
That's not a compliment. Yeah, it's not a compliment. We call the swimming pool the disability danger zone, my partner and I, because it's just like the worst place to be disabled. And people genuinely, I've had so many experiences of people approaching me at the swimming pool and saying I'm inspiring, or they can't believe I'm getting out there and living my life. And I'm usually at the pool, my hair's scruffy. I probably just rolled out of bed and put my probably 2 old bathers on, and I'm there in all my glorious disabled fatness, and I just want to go for a swim. And people do feel entitled to approach disabled people and ask them about their disability. So the pool is also where I get stared at a lot by kids who, I understand, with kids they have a natural curiosity, and often disability hasn't been normalised for them because it's not represented on their TV shows, in their books. Their parents don't really talk about disability. They don't make any effort for their kids to know disabled kids. So when they see a disabled person out in the wild, they're like, whoa. And they want to know more about it.
The natural curiosity. They go, okay, well, they're different. Oh, and they stare there just that little bit longer. And then, of course, you looking back going, oh, here we go.
But when I walk into a pool, it's like a whole room full of people, including adults, and adults have a particular way of staring where they sort of look down and across, and they think that you can't see it, but disabled people see it, we know. And so it's just this thing of like this whole room of people staring at you while you're like barely dressed and like about to get, it's a weird situation. But yeah, Maisie's experiences are all based on real life experiences, so that scene was an important one for me, because I'd like to do what Maisie does and just say that's not a compliment and poke my tongue out, but usually I don't. I'm not very good at confrontation, so I usually just say thank
Maisie
you
be
and
the
then get in the water and go. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I find that really interesting, because that sort of leads me on to the other part about what we as a society need to actually do more of to have better representation. to be more inclusive, and what can we do as a society?
So one of the best things we can do is normalize disability for our kids, and that's not just so that when they encounter disabled people, they understand a bit more about the fact that bodies can be different. They'll still want to have a look, they'll still be curious, but showing that disability is part of human diversity, that it's nothing to be ashamed of or sad about, that it's not a tragedy. Teaching kids that is really good. So, having, Kiuna on Play School, and having, disabled people commentating, the Olympics or sport, or, having disability sport played on mainstream TV during times when people would watch it, having disabled characters on shows like Home and Away and Neighbours, where their storyline is not just for the benefit of some other character to be inspired or to learn something. They've just got to be everywhere. We need disabled people everywhere where kids consume media, and that's true for adults too. But I think my focus is on kids because, I became disabled when I was 9. I wasn't born with my disability, and there was no representation that I could see of anyone like me. I felt like a freak. I felt like I wasn't normal. I didn't identify as disabled, and I spent all of my time as a kid trying to be the least disabled person I could be. So trying to look like an able-bodied person. I had a leg that, looked like an able-bodied leg. They shaved it to make it the foam cover to make it look the same as my other leg. So I would have that symmetry. I wore long pants over my legs so that most people couldn't tell except for the slight limp. I didn't mention my disability if I could get away with it. I wanted to pass as able-bodied. And I think that is really damaging for a young person's psyche. I think we need to actually embrace disability as a positive thing. It can be hard, there can be challenges, and people need to be able to talk about the hard parts of their disability. For example, chronic pain is not a walk in the park. It really sucks. But also I have this incredible community that I was never connected into as a kid. I didn't really even know they existed. And if I did, I didn't feel like I was part of them or like I should be part of them. I felt like the point was to be able-bodied. And so as a kid, I think, as soon as I came out as queer, I got connected in so quickly to the queer community and to that sense of pride, and I felt supported, I felt loved, I felt that it was good to be queer, that I was okay to be me, but I never got that for my disability. So I think just lots of good disability representation everywhere a kid looks. We are part of every story, every show, every book, but also making a point of connecting disabled kids into their community and letting them know they're part of a rights movement, that they have a history that they can be proud of, that there's a community that often supports each other, that provides peer support, that provides mutual aid, that has your back.
Are there resources for the parents to help guide the kids through? I mean, nowadays I'm sure there is, but back when you were young, did your parents have the resources?
No, and I think they tried. They did a really good job. I had a great childhood, but I think it's when you find community, which I did in, I guess, my late 20s, and you learn about disability, identity, and pride, and community and history. It's at that point that you realize what you lacked. And so I don't think many parents of disabled kids who are not disabled have those resources or know where to look, or even know that they should be looking. And so those conversations that we need to be having as a society. And then, what else does society need to do? Well, they need to look at inaccessibility. I am a part-time wheelchair user, and God, just getting around is so difficult because people either don't think of it, or if they do, they think that's too hard. It's not just about wheelchairs either. There's so many forms of accessibility that we as a society could decide to do. And in fact, the pandemic really brought home how easy it was to provide online access, for example, when
Yep.
people needed it, when non-disabled people needed it. So suddenly you could study online, you could work online, you could work from home. There was flexibility because kids were home because of home learning. So suddenly, workplaces were looking at how to help their workers juggle, kids and work. And I look at that and I think we're just going to go back to the way it was. I think there'll be some workplaces and some event organisers who will do things differently, but mostly what I'm seeing is that we're slowly returning to the way things were, because non-disabled people don't need that anymore.
Yeah, and
So,
it's not on their radar. If they don't see it, they don't think about it. It's not. I mean, like, it's true. I mean, I'll walk around, Bunbury's the closest place, and I wouldn't not be thinking of access, of what kind of access there is, until you actually are in that situation, or you know someone, or you've been highlighted to the fact, and then you can walk around with new eyes and go, holy shit,
and
this is just
it's not just
embarrassing.
our public place. I can't get into a lot of my friends' houses in a wheelchair. So it's not just the main street, it's how people design their houses. Getting a rental as a disabled person is hard if you need access in that house, because houses are designed for non-disabled people. If you become disabled in your own home, you often have to leave your home because houses are not designed for non-disabled people. You can try and retrofit and change houses, and we do, but there is a shift that could happen in the thinking of everyone, where we think, well, if I had suddenly had a friend who was disabled, if I suddenly had a kid who was disabled, if I suddenly became disabled, would I be able to get around my house? Would I be able to get around my street, my local park, my main street, my workplace? Because what happens is someone becomes disabled, or someone disabled applies for a job or tries to get into a shop, and then we react to that. We go, okay, oh no, can we accommodate this disability in this workplace or in this school or in this home? When really the attitude needs to be, how can we make our society more inclusive and accessible right from the beginning? How can we build houses so that anyone could live in them? Those sorts of questions.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is, as a society as a whole, the nuclear family, the white Anglo-Saxon concept of family and all that, we're suddenly realizing this is not the case. This is not a representation of the broader community, which includes disability, which includes queerness, includes multicultural people everywhere. And we need better examples of that in our advertising, in our TV, in everywhere. But how do you stop it from being tokenistic? You said before about publishing, about sometimes they go to, okay, we had our 4 queer books published this year. We've got one for disability. We've got one for, whatever. How do we avoid it being tokenistic?
I think, a lot of LGBT books, when they were first published, LGBTIQA+ books, they were published by people who needed them for their own families, their own bookshelves, and they self-published them. And I experienced self-publishing with Introducing Teddy. I think that's how a lot of those books get off the ground to start with, because you know that you need it, and you know that probably another small group of people need it. And then suddenly some of those books were doing really well. And so major publishers were like, okay, maybe we should publish some of these books ourselves because there is an audience for them. So I think, and Introducing Teddy, once had done well self-publishing, it got picked up by a major publisher. We got an agent out of it because they were like, okay, there's an audience for this, this book. So
didn't Neil Gaiman have a small part in that?
Absolutely.
What's the story with that?
So I self-published the book, and then, like a lot of people who self-publish, you have to do a lot of hard work to promote it yourself. And Neil Gaiman is my favorite author, and I'd seen him retweet some great stuff about other people's books, and I thought, well, why not? I'll just give it a try. So I messaged Neil and said, actually maybe tweeted at him. I think I'd just started a Twitter account and tweeted about my Kickstarter, and he was very kind and tweeted something about how we needed more books like that. And then we started getting media from the UK calling, and it snowballed from there. Suddenly I was getting calls from was it Brazil media in the middle of the night, and just places that I never would have thought the book would go.
Mm.
And I had a young baby at the time, and so I'd be up like looking after the baby and doing international interviews and just thinking, how is this my life now? And it was so exciting because I'd always wanted to be a writer, but felt kind of discouraged from doing creative writing as a kid. And I kind of found my way back to it because I wrote this book that I needed for my family. And, you know, now there are so many wonderful, wonderful picture books written by trans and non-binary authors that are coming out. And it's just so wonderful to see that. And I feel like, you know, I wrote Introducing Teddy for me and my family, but I would rather now celebrate books by trans authors and try writing myself in through books like through Stars in Their Eyes. You know, that was my chance to really write about my disability and my queerness. Yeah, and that's been really special. And I want to keep doing that.
Yeah, I think the world needs your stories and needs your message. Now, what would you go back and tell your 11-year-old self? What does your 11-year-old self need to hear?
You are disabled. Disabled is not a dirty word. In fact, disability pride is going to be one of the most important and powerful things in your life. And your community, your disabled community, is going to be just as important to you as your queer community. So find them and find joy with them.
Yeah.
Find joy in your body. Love your body. Stop waiting to love it, because, you know, I spent a lot of time, I joined Weight Watchers as a teenager, you know, trying to lose weight, and I kept thinking to myself, I'll love my body when I've lost a certain amount of weight. You know, I had this disability, and I thought, I'll love myself when I can afford like a really good prosthetic leg that looks like a real leg. And, you know, yeah, I just had all of these experiences as a kid where I put off loving myself. And so what I would say to 11-year-old me is, don't put that off. Just start loving yourself right now. Work on it.
Wow, it's that whole self-acceptance thing, isn't it? It is so important for every kid to have that, especially kids like yourself when you're 11 and all that sort of stuff. Look, Jessica, thank you so much for writing this. It's such an important book, and I think it is going to be part, as you said, part of this new wave of books and literature coming out, celebrating diversity, but also disability, and normalizing it, making it there for everyone. Just go, okay, fair enough. I mean, I was lucky enough to go to a high school where it was totally accessible for kids in wheelchairs. And we had, I think, about, I don't know, maybe 20 kids, whatever, with disability. And it was just they were just part of the school. It was just normal. It was just nothing special, you know, and that was me learning that was normal. So, Jessica, last question. What lights you up?
What lights me up? Oh, my kids make me laugh all the time. You know, they are just so incredibly funny and so kind and open-hearted, and they love themselves and they love everyone else that they meet. They're just I think kids are so much better than adults and they just make me laugh all the time. So yeah, they light me up. They make me laugh. I think adults learn to play again when kids are around, and that's been one of the joys of the last 7 years with my kids is. And you know, and also with my nieces and nephews and nibblings, just getting to kind of hang out with them and see the world through their eyes, and and see their joy. That gives me joy.
I totally agree. I think all adults should spend more time with young kids to take ourselves less seriously and learn to play again. Look, Jessica, thank you so much for writing Stars in Their Eyes out through Fremantle Press and illustrated by the ever fabulous Aśka. Thank you, Jessica. Really loved having you on the show, and thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I loved it too. Bye.